Hello, and welcome to an afternoon with James Lee Burke. I'm Lori Lacefield, president of the Rocky Mountain chapter of Mystery Writers of America, and I would like to thank Mr. Burke and fellow MWA member David Heska Wanbli Weiden for participating in today's event. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, Sisters in Crime Colorado, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, and the Tattered Cover Bookstore. We'll begin with introductions, followed by three 20-minute blocks of conversation and a 10-minute break to draw book winners and answer a couple of your questions. And now I'll turn it over to ZJ.
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm ZJ Zupor, and I'm president of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, and I'm a former board member of the Rocky Mountain chapter, Mystery Writers of America. I'm delighted today to introduce you to our guest of honor, James Lee Burke, who's one of America's most beloved authors. He's a best-selling and multiple award-winning writer, best known for his Dave Robichaux series of novels, which have been translated into almost every language in the world, and his Holland Family saga series of novels. In 2009, Mystery Writers of America named James its Grand Master, and he's won 2 Edgar Awards from Mystery Writers of America and a Guggenheim Fellowship in Creative Arts and Fiction. Early in his career, James held several jobs, and after he graduated from the University of Missouri with his master's degree in English literature, he taught at several universities. I'll share with you one inspirational story about his writing career. After James published his first 2 novels, his third, The Lost Get Back Boogie, languished. In other words, it stayed under submission for over 9 years and was rejected more than 111 times. As a result, James went unpublished for 13 years. Finally, his novel was picked up by the Louisiana State University Press, and get this, is nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. His latest novel is Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. Interviewing James today is our other guest, award-winning writer David Heska Wanbli Weiden. David lives in Denver, and he's an enrolled citizen of the Sicango Lakota Nation. His debut novel, Winter Counts, was nominated for the Edgar Award, the Anthony Award, the Barry Award, the McCavity Award, the Shamus Award, and the Hammett Prize. The novel won the Thriller, Lefty, Tilly Olson, and Spur Awards. The New York Times named David one of the most critically acclaimed young novelists working now. He's also the first Native American author to win the Anthony Award and the Thriller Award, and only the second to be nominated for the Edgar Award. Winter Counts has been published in the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, and translated into Turkish, Polish, and Japanese. Dave is also the author of the children's book Spotted Tail, a biography of the great Lakota leader. David is a professor of Native American Studies and Political Science at Metropolitan State University of Denver, and he teaches in the low residency MFA program at Regis University, the Pan-European MFA program at Cedar Crest College, and Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver. We're honored that both James and David are members of our Rocky Mountain chapter, Mystery Writers of America. Welcome to you both. David, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction. Am I coming through okay sound-wise?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you to James Lee Burke, who has generously allowed me to call him Jim. It's hard for me to do so because I hold this gentleman in such esteem. It's hard for me not to say Mr. Burke, but he's most kindly allowed me to call him Jim. And so I want to, kind of start this today by just setting and giving a little context for Jim and the significance of his work. I think it is fair to say that James Lee Burke is one of the great novelists in America. His work spans generations and themes. He's written over 40 novels, including, as has been previously mentioned, the Robichaux series and the Holland Family saga and some others. I loved his new novel, which I've got right here, Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. And I'm going to read just a little snippet from it. I think it's fair to say it's his most personal novel ever. And I was thrilled, I was moved, and it may be my favorite, Jim, of all of your books. And that's saying a lot because I have a lot of favorites in there. Okay, so it is really, really an honor to speak with you today, one of the grandmasters, not just of crime fiction, but of American literature. So it is fantastic to be with James Lee Burke. And I'm going to start by just reading the first paragraph of this book, because if you have not had the honor of reading this yet, I urge you to go out and do so, because you will not be disappointed. Here's the first paragraph. I gaze upon the season from my veranda and know all too well its gaseous vapors and fading colors and deceptive embrace. An orange sun hangs in the cottonwoods down by the river, backdropped by the razored peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains. For me, the sun's lack of warmth is a harbinger of our times, or at best, a sign of our collective ephemerality. But please don't be taken aback. Age is not kind, and it leaves a mean stamp on an elderly man's perceptions. Now, that is an astonishing first paragraph. It has a quality of elegy to it. It is wonderfully written, and I believe that it sets the tone for the book. So I'm going to turn it over here to Jim, and I'm going to say, can you tell us a little bit about this amazing book? What inspired it, the writing of it? So if you could talk to us, please, we would love to hear.
Well, the book operates on several levels. It deals with the past, of course, the massacre of the Indians on the Marias River. But it's not so much a historical view that I tried to create. Instead, I was trying to show also that we are the consequences of the past, and in many ways our policies have not changed, or at least, and not in my view, but anyway, I didn't mean to denigrate others or proselytize. Also, the book was very personal because it deals with loss, and the loss of our daughter Pamela, which will be the 2 years at the end of this month. And, I wrote this for various reasons, and in terms of that experience, that the loss of one's child is hard to deal with, and because it's not natural, there's something wired into us that when child predeceases the parent, it has a traumatic influence that is very hard to deal with. And without having experienced that syndrome, a person cannot appreciate it. There are no words for it, but I tried to give them words. And so for good or bad, I wrote this book.
Well, I am, first of all, I want to say, and I mean this deeply and sincerely, I want to give my condolences and really everyone. It's a terrible thing. I'm the father of 2 teenage boys, 15 and 17, and they are the light of my life. I'd give it all away for them. And so I was deeply moved by this book, and I want to give the condolences. And I'm wondering if it's all right, we would like to hear about Pamela's life, her love of animals, her writing about the natural world, and how her love of animals and nature really inspired the character Fannie Mae. We want to hear the good stuff about her, if you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, you just mentioned some of her virtues there, and I created a character. Well, I can't say I created the character. That is not true. I replicated the character. And that's always been the case, at least in my books. I don't know where the characters come from. I might think I'm writing about a certain person, but the character tends to take over the story. But Pamela was an extraordinary person, and one of the best human beings I ever knew. Remarkable in every way. She had an extraordinary life. She was my confessor, my psychologist, my publicist, heck on wheels. If you got her mad at you, she was wonderful at dealing with Hollywood, with anything. We always used to say it in the family. If you got something broken, just give it to Pamela and forget it. She'd fix it. She would just fix it. And she was also, she had supernatural gifts, no question about it. She saw through the veil. I do not doubt it one bit that Pamela saw the future. She saw dead people. Even when she was a little girl, 3 or 4 years old, she could look at everyone in a room and it was like taking a picture. Later on, she would tell you everything that was in that room, everything anybody said. But her great love was animals. And she got really mad at me because I would tell people this story, even that we live outside Missoula, and we have a ranch, and she lived right down the road from us. But she let all her animals in the house. The whole house was packed with animals. There were cats that seat smears all over the furniture, the breakfast table. The goats came in. She had 2 goats named Okie and Dokie. A friend of ours visiting there said, waking up at Pamela's house is like waking up inside a fur ball. It's full of animal hair. It gets better. Pamela called up an industrial cleaning service, brought them into the house. And they quit on the job and then wrote her a letter and said that her house had burned up their cleaning instruments. The rubber tie is on, the rubber tally, I don't know. They burned up all the machinery, and the the vacuum cleaners were packed with animal hair and manure. This is from her house. She had all these animals that she would rescue, and she had these 2 dogs that were absolutely untrainable. One of them was named Kaiser. And Kaiser was born maniacal. He was absolutely crazy. And she was in town in a really rich neighborhood. She had Kaiser on a leash, and then she decided to turn him loose. And he ran across a lawn. Just as this gentleman was opening his front door, Kaiser ran into his living room, did this huge download on his rug, and then cleaned himself by scraping his rump across the rug, and then he ran back out of the house again. That was just one day in the life of Pamela and her animals. Anyway, but Pamela was a very unusual person, and it's a great loss. But anyway, enough said.
Well, your love and your joyfulness and keeping these memories alive, it's really moving, and it's wonderful. So thank you, really. And I want, here's the interesting thing. Your other daughter is, of course, the crime novelist Alifair Burke. Now, she's a law professor at Hofstra, and I was a professor at Hofstra, but weirdly enough, our paths did not cross. Now, I wasn't in the law school, so I regret that we didn't know each other there. We were there at the same time. That's odd. But can you tell us a little bit, because she does work in criminal law and also writes crime fiction?
Well, so we have another daughter too, Andre, who is a psychologist. But Alifair taught at there in the my heavens, what's the county? My head went blank. They're in Long Island.
Hofstra.
Anyway, Hofstra, and I think she has published, is it 19 novels now?
Oh, wow.
She's very talented. She started writing when she was 7 years old. Her first short story was called The Hungry Butterfly. She had another one called The Roller Rink Murder Mystery. But she could read. She was reading Cool Hand Luke when she was 5 years old. This is a true story. It's not exaggeration. Her IQ is not measurable. Only 2 in a million have it. And I tell people this, and my wife is Asian, and I didn't make this up. I tell people about Alifair's intelligence. She graduated #1 at Stanford Law. Anyway, when I tell them this, there's a pause. And then the person says, "Your wife must be such intelligent."
Oh boy.
My wife should be so, golly Moses. Humility has always found me one way or another.
That's great. I just love hearing these family stories. I've got, again, 2 teenage boys. We have a rough ride at times, but I love them so much. They're starting to think about college and all that. And so it's just wonderful to hear these wonderful and great and humorous and fantastic stories. So thank you for sharing them with us, really. Let me take it back to the book here. Let me take it back to the book. So every cloak, I'm going to show it one more time. Every cloak rolled in blood. I noticed something, that it's set in the present day, because you make references to COVID, mask wearing, MAGA. And I have not seen many writers yet write about COVID in their current fiction. And tell me about that decision, because that surprised me just a bit.
Well, you're right. It begins in the first page there. COVID, here we are with masks on our face. I was born in the Great Depression. And when you grew up in that era, you were confronted with polio. We were scared to death. And we saw what it did to people. No one knew the origin. We knew probably things happened in theaters, swimming pools, and other places. Stay away from them. And when the cure came along, the assault vaccine, people were just so thankful that this terrible thing had been taken from us. And still today, I cannot understand the narcissism, the contempt often for those who would wear a mask or take take as many preventatives as possible to prevent hurting themselves, their families, and to hurting their neighbors. By neighbor, I mean our fellow man. And I do not understand it, that we politicize, I say we, many people politicized what was just a commonsensical way of dealing with a very, very dangerous time in our lives that took now over 1 million lives. We have to go back to 1918 to find an antecedent.
I'll jump off on that. I've got more questions about the book, but I'm looking now at page 85, and the character Aaron Broussard he's hopeful at times. There's a real humanity in the book, especially in his treatment of Jack Wetzel, and then some of the internal monologue at times, the narration. There's some pessimism there. Let me read just a bit here. Here's the top of page 85. I did not mean to seem cynical about belief. Age has brought me little, if any, wisdom. I knew more at 21 than at 40. Why is that? Because at age 40, I was dumb enough to believe I knew anything at all. The only lesson I've learned in life is that the human personality does not change, and our propensity for destroying the earth and our fellow man is stronger and more wanton than it has ever been. And if the incineration of our cities and civilians and the increased lethality of our weapons during the last 100 years has not taught us that, nothing will. Now that's a pretty dark, how much of that is coming from the character and how much of it is coming from you?
Well, both, but I don't think it's an assessment or a speculation. I think it's simply demonstrable. That's what has occurred. The most violent, destructive century in human history is the 20th century. But we have not learned from it. That's just simply the fact. And we're dealing right now with the same issues, the same people, the same kinds of moments in history as we were in 1915. And one of the most important books for me to read, nonfiction book, about not simply the 20th century, but the future of the world, is the wonderful book by Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And in that book, in that first chapter of that book, is one of the most haunting pieces I have ever read. He says the issue is resources, primarily oil. And he said that is the issue in 1915. It will be the same issue a century from this time. And that's where we are today. What happened in the last few days? The President of the United States went just. I admire President Biden, but I do not think that we should do what we're doing now. We're humiliating ourselves to deal with a man who committed, obviously, a murder of a journalist. And that's the power they have over us, that we're still stuck with neo-colonialism and dependence on, well, I didn't mean to get into all this, but it's not an assessment. It is where we are. That's it. It is where we are. But did you ever see a film starring Marlon Brando by the name of The Formula? Nobody has seen it. But it's about the oil business. And look, I grew up in the oil business. The oil business put me through college. I worked in the oil patch. My mother worked 40 years for an oil company. My father was a natural gas engineer. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying this is what it is. Anyway, in the film, Marlon Brando plays this Texas oil man, and he's got a friend named WJ, one of his pals. And WJ says, "Hey, Jimmy Lee?" I made up the pseudonym. Them damn Arabs have sure given us a lot of trouble, ain't they? And Marlon's character says, "Son, haven't you figured it out? We are the damn Arabs."
Oh my. Oh my. Oh my. You're talking about oil. That's something. Oil and resources. The Native Americans, I don't mean to speak for all natives because I'm Lakota and there are 577 nations in the United States and we're all different. People think that if you're one native that you speak for all of them. I always make it very clear to folks that, look, I don't speak for all natives. In fact, I don't even speak for all Lakota people, but I think it's fair to say that most Native Americans, we have a different relationship with resources. There's a phrase in our language, mitakuyoy ayasin, we are all related. So we believe that humans we exist in balance. And so, there's sort of a different perspective about just stripping the land of resources wantonly. And you have a very native sub-theme running throughout this book. I was going to get to this later, and I know we're due for a break soon, but you portray some of the native slaughters that have happened in America, and that was obviously tough to read, but very well done. And you also have the character Ruby Spotted Horse. So I noticed there was very much, and I read another interview that you've you really admire Black Elk Speaks. And so, you know, I found a very strong native indigenous subcurrent running through this. I wondered if you wanted to speak to that.
Well, yeah, well, what you said very well. Yes, absolutely. I think the problem we have today is we have not acknowledged the policies that we created and followed through the entirety of the 19th century. And if we do not acknowledge our faults, our sins, then we're doomed to repeating them over and over. And look, for example, I just finished writing a book. It's set during the years 1862 and 63, the war between the states. And what we don't examine, let's take, for example, villainizing Confederate generals, throwing statues down, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't want to get into that. But the point is, these are emblematic moments that really represent something else. But okay, all right, get rid of the statues. Well, what have we omitted here? William Sherman legitimized terrorism. He was a terrorist. He committed war crimes and was lauded for them. Where did he go in 1865? Or General Sheridan or General Custer? They went back into the Union Army and went west and began to do the same thing. They learned it on dear old Dixie's back. Now that is the fact. These are not heroic actions. They are the actions of war criminals. That's what they were. Now, that sounds like a terrible thing to say. Here is the reality. They did not defeat the American Indians in an honorable fashion. They starved them to death, and they did that by killing the American bison. And William Sherman was one of the supporters of that program to take tens of millions of buffalo and kill them and let them lie on the ground all over the American West. Here are the statistics. In the year 1830, there were an estimated number of 50 million bison. By the year 1892, the herd was reduced to 200. That's it. That's what we did to keep an entire race of people. The name for that is genocide. We did it. To say that something else happened is to simply benight oneself. So that's where we are. And the prejudices are still there. I've seen it over and over. I've been out in the West for many, many years. Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, Montana. It's still there. And why do we resent the Native Americans? It's because we feel guilt about it. I mean, Wounded Knee, that's just one of them. How about the Watasha? When Custer attacked the sleeping village in Oklahoma Territory. You go on and on with the Baker Massacre is the worst. It is one of the most horrible deeds ever committed in the American history. The Baker Massacre took place, I mentioned it before, the Marias River. I remember something I used to, it would always bother me when I was a little boy. My family has lived on Bayou Teche in New Iberia since 1836. And on my aunt's property, the family's owned this piece of land for many, many years. There is a huge live oak tree. And when I was a little boy, there were chains driven with iron spikes into the trunk of the tree. And even then, I'm talking about January, first time I saw those chains was January of 1941. The chain had been subsumed by the tree, and it crawled in and out like a stiffened snake with rust all over it. But those chains were not just mooring chains. They were the chains that were used to bring the boats up the bayou loaded with slaves in violation of the 1811 or 1808 a rule that there could be no more importation of slaves. Jim Bowie and, oh God, the pirate, my heavens, my head went blank again. Golly, anyway, pirates and Jim Bowie, he was a great man and a very brave man, but he was a slaver too. That's where the auction took place. And also the bounty that had been taken from ships out on the Spanish Main, bring them to New Iberia and auction them off. But I always thought about those chains as an unconfessed sin. In other words, that tree's still there, but there's no sign of the chains. They're down there in the heart of the tree.
David, if I could cut in here, I apologize.
Yeah.
I want to take a quick break here because we have some valuable items we'd like to give away to our audience. We have done a random drawing of everybody who registered today. And so we are going to be giving away at this break a coffee mug that's branded by James Lee Burke. And David has graciously offered to give away his book, Winter Counts, and also a signed copy of James's latest book. So in the random selection, our coffee mug will go to Terry Benson. For David's book, Winter Counts, goes to Kay Kendall. And for James's book, Every Cloak Rolled in Blood, goes to Marissa Fife. So congratulations, everybody. And we'll do more giveaways at the next break. We do have a couple of questions for Jim. The first one comes from Melvin Bullock, who lives in central Louisiana. And Jim, he wants to know if you ever get back to Cajun country anymore.
Well, we lived there a long time. I'm there in spirit, but I haven't been there in a while. We sold our home, which we had owned many years on the bayou. And I think pretty soon we're going to be going back there again. I'm sure that's the plan, but do you know the expression, if you want to make God's, let me get this off drop out my throat. If you want to make God smile, tell him what your plans are.
Indeed. Well, I'm sure they'll be happy to have you back there. We have another question from. Sorry, we have another question from Michael Schott. He wants to know if you've given any thought to giving Cleet his own book.
Well, I don't think very far ahead in what I write. So right now, I just finished this story, Civil War story. It's a remarkable book, but my head's kind of tied back there. I still hear many balls flying through the air.
Okay. This is from John Lavelle. Have you considered doing a story to fill in the time that Cleet Purcell and Dave served in Vietnam? Telling the horrors of their time might add a great deal to the novels.
I didn't quite understand the question.
The question is, any thought to doing a story about the time in Vietnam when Dave and Cleet served there?
Yeah, I understand the question. Yes, but it brings up another subject, and namely is the books were never intended to be about Vietnam. They were intended to deal with neo-colonialism. It's something that is not a moment in our history that we embarked perhaps mistakenly in a policy and then we corrected that policy. That is not the case. It is ongoing. We're still where we are, just like T.E. Lawrence said, that we are marching in the footsteps in the sands of both the British and the French. And I don't think we've learned our lesson yet. You cannot challenge an Islamic culture. It's madness. Look, my father was one of the most intelligent men I ever knew, and he was a very good human being too. But I will never forget this. It was VJ Day. The whole country just went crazy. This is a fact. In New Orleans, the girls in the strip joints came out on Bourbon Street and climbed on top of cars and took all their clothes off. That's a fact. Yay, New Orleans. Yeah. Anyway, but VJ Day, my dad had some people over for drinks and everyone was really happy. And then everyone called my father Jimmy. And said, and this one gentleman said, well, Jimmy, what's your feeling about this? And my father said, and I'm quoting, and it's paraphrased, but it's pretty close. He said, well, this is my perception. He said, England is gone and France is gone. The only great power left really is the United States. He said, however, he said, Russia is now going to move. And its policy forever will be the following. They will not fight a fair or honorable war. Instead, they will use surrogates. And we will die the cuts of the bleeding death of 1,000 cuts using insurgencies all over the third world. And he said, finally, we will, in effect, have a foreign policy that is a return to the Monroe Doctrine, and it will be predicated not upon strength, but upon weakness. And ultimately, we will be undone by ourselves. Those were his words. And the whole room was just dead silent. And my dad walked out the back door and he sat in the yard by himself. He wouldn't speak the rest of the day. Wow. But then he said it. He said it. That's it. That's where we are right now. This is why Mr. Putin's following the exact same Bolshevik plans that these guys had back in 1917, 18, through the 20s, through the 30s, through the 40s. We are still there, still locked in their same embrace. How do they do it? Again and again, it is a return to neo-colonialism. That's it.
Well, thank you. Well, David, I'll turn it back to you. And again, congratulations to our winners, and we'll do some more at the next break.
I know we have a lot of writers watching, and I promise I've got some writing questions, but it's just so fascinating talking with Mr. Burke here about some of these issues. At page 179, I want to talk a little bit about Angola prison. So I'll read just a little bit again here. This is from page 179 in the new book. Back then, in Louisiana, the electric chair traveled from parish to parish. 2 big generators on the back of a truck were brought to the jail by the executioner, and the rubber-encased power cables were roped through a barred window on the 3rd floor and attached to the electric chair, whose nickname was Gruesome Gertie. That evening, an electrical storm swept across the wetlands. The booms of thunder and sheets of rain slapping against the jail were deafening, augmented by the generators kicking to life, spinning with a whine and gaining speed until the centrifugal roar was louder than the storm. I wanted the generators to drown out the sounds from what was called the death cell, the minister reading from his Bible, the condemned man whispering an apology, the strained creak of the leather when the first jolt hit him. I will stop there. That was a powerful passage, and one that really spoke to me because I have been to Angola prison. in 2019, PEN America sponsored me and 10 other people. They gave us the Writing for Justice Fellowship, and I wrote about the mass incarceration of Native Americans. And as part of it, they took us to Angola. And I didn't know this, but Angola prison, when you take a tour there, they bring you right into death row. And so we moved right into death row, and we were allowed to speak with these men. And then they took us to the death chamber. I was pretty shocked that they brought us right in there. So I have seen this, and I think they have Gruesome Gertie actually on display in the museum. And so, that visit changed me. That was a really something to see. I mean, words really can't do it justice. Well, can you tell us a little bit about this passage, because the book is laden with little insights and passages. So I want to, if you can, talk to this, please.
Well, I made a vow some time ago. I'll never talk about the people I've seen in certain places or those events, but I know this. I know this is an absolute. There is such a thing as a form of evil for which we don't have an explanation. It exists in people who seem to come from a different tree. I'm talking about genetics now. But I know, and I've seen those people, and I've heard them talk, and I've witnessed things that have, I won't say any more. I'll write about it, but I won't say any more. Okay. I'm not trying to duck the question. This is the way I feel about evil. Don't give it another life. Show it for what it is, but don't give it another life. But I am convinced that if we ever have a fascist government, there will be plenty of people there to run the chimneys, incinerators, turn the world into a place of barbed wire and searchlights. They're there. I've seen them. I've talked to them. And you don't want to be around them. And I'm not talking about culprits. I'm talking about people who are in the regime. But I'm not going to say another thing. I'll break my own rule. And I don't say those things. But in a baptized Christian civilization, I know of things that people could not believe were done. They were done, and they were done with the sanction of the electorate. And I say the electorate, I'm talking about the people who vote and put people in offices who are absolute sociopaths. And it's demonstrable. But they're there, and there's no point in talking about it. And it makes you wince inside, but when it's over. Look, let me put it in a more finite situation. There are certain people, when you shake their hand, it's like black electricity coming up your forearm, and you want to get a lot of gone between you and them. Those are the people. They are there. They always look for a place where there's power. That's it. They need a gun, maybe need a badge, they need a uniform, a banner with God's name on top of it. But they'll look for the source of empowerment. But in effect, they are antithetical to everything that we think of as civilized. But this is like my father again. My father did not believe that we all can come from the same source. There's a bunch out there, and they're slick, brother. But maybe time it's just Joe Bob spitting tobacco all over the place, and he seems like a nice person. He's not a nice person. Anyway, that's
well. And I don't want to give readers and viewers out there the idea that the book is all dark. There are some dark passages in there, certainly. But I want to talk about one more thing, because I was quite struck by the protagonist's, Baron Broussard's, his relationship with the young man, Jack Wetzel. there was a real humanity, and it was a very touching and moving scenario. So Jack Wetzel is a young man that is troubled and has done some bad things, but the protagonist in the book sort of takes him under his wing, and I was quite moved by that. What could you talk about that a little bit? So it was quite lovely.
Well, that's it. The many, we don't want to give the impression that the book is, just part like an assault on the sensibilities. But the main character, Aaron Broussard, tries to help these young fellows, who have fallen on bad times. And, if people do a study of prisons and the system, you quickly learn that justice is blind. Rich people don't go to the electric chair. I mean, rich people do not go to jail most of the time. But anyway, Aaron, the narrator, had some trouble with the law when he was a kid. He wasn't a criminal, and he says that. He said he was never a criminal, but he was crazy. When he was 18 years old, he was absolutely out of his mind. But so he tries to help these boys, and he's a good-hearted and very decent man, and he's a brave man, and he's also a man of principle who will take it to him. That Southern expression, take it to him, brother. But and it's a funny book in many ways. You mentioned Black Elk Speaks. John Neihart, who wrote that, was my first poetry professor. I took the writing of poetry with John Neihart at the University of Missouri and became a good friend of his, and my wife as well. And we used to go out to his farm often. And he knew what had occurred to the Sioux and the terrible things. We destroyed an entire group of people and gave them whiskey and starvation. Anyway, but Dr. Neihart always had he had a smile on his face. You never let evil undo. You never look. This is I like Aaron says about having any wisdom. And if wisdom comes with age, it sure went past him, and it sure went past me. But you learn one thing: there are light bearers in the world. The light bearer in the world. These are the people who have an aura about them. And these are the people that we link hands with, and we never give up on our nation. This is the best country in the world. I was in Amnesty International 9 years, and I was chair 1 year of our group. And I learned an awful lot with Amnesty, that how everyone in the world wants to be like us. Look, we get into wars with third world countries, peopled by individuals who want to be Americans. They love rock and roll. Baseball is their national game. They think Elvis Presley is a god. They like Coca-Cola. Just you name it. If it's American, they love it. That's it. No matter what people say, no matter how we mess up, they want American culture. Look, what is the most beautiful country in the world in terms of geology and geography? It's the United States. We have everything. It's just like somebody made it up and said, how do you make a perfect world? Say, here it is, brother. It has the Atlantic on one side, the Pacific on the other, and in between, every kind of climate there is. Good God. This is what I cannot understand. People who can be told and believe that this country is falling apart. Are you kidding? How do you sell that to people? Jeez. We were We go to all the powwows, and I love the T-shirts that are there. I buy every one I have if I can afford it. Anyway, my favorite is "Love It or Leave It." No, love it or give it back. Love it or give it back. Right on. My other favorite is the one showing Geronimo with three of his guys holding rifles, and it says, "Fighting terrorism since 1492.
I've seen that one. Well,
We need more stickers. Love it or leave it. Go live on the Antarctic. Beat it. Jeez.
I just want to emphasize this point again to folks that are watching. I want to be clear here that when you read a James Lee Burke novel, you're getting it all. You're getting the humor that we're seeing so much today. You're getting some philosophy. You're getting the humanity. You're getting it all. And that's what I loved about this book, as well as all of your writing. And it's such a joy to speak with you today and learn about all these different aspects. And, I read another interview with you, and it said that you only look 2 scenes ahead in a book. And that's interesting to me as a writer. And when in writing every Cloak Rolled in Blood, as you were writing it, did anything surprise you? It appears that you don't plot it out ahead of time, you don't outline or anything. As you were writing it, did anything surprise you? Or let me turn it over to you. Was it surprising, the final product?
It always is. I never know how the book ends. I don't know how it will end until 2 or 3 pages before I put a 30. Journalists put 30 at the end of the story manuscript. I see about 2 scenes in the early morning hours, about 4 a.m. And I keep this book here. This is my notebook for the Civil War book I just wrote, and I keep that by my desk, and I write it in the early hours with longhand. And then I put those 2 scenes into the book for the day, and I aim at 750 words, and then I rewrite the material from yesterday. And if I do that every day, and I take no days off, that's an absolute, unless I have to. But I work 7 days a week, and I can write a novel in 11 months. That's how it usually comes out. But I never know how they're coming. Ernest Hemingway said it all. He was asked that question, and he said, "If I knew the end of a story, so would the reader." Papa had some great things to say. No one said as many accurate things about writing as Ernest Hemingway. He, just before his death, he stopped at this saloon right outside of Missoula. That was 1961. And I guess he was on his way back to Idaho. He had a place there. But he walked into this bar. It's a rough place. It's a mill town. And some logger at the bar looked at him and said, "Well, guess who thinks he's Ernest Hemingway?" And Papa said, "That's because I'm Ernest Hemingway, and he bought the house around." That story's still there at that bar. I bet that logger's still there. How embarrassing.
Oh. That's a good one. That's great.
Thank you, David. So from our random drawings, we're going to give away 3 more prizes on this break. The winner of a James Lee Burke branded cap is Deborah Patton. And the winner of David's book, Winter Counts, is Ted Blaine. And the winner of James's recent book is Stacy Pearson. So congratulations to all of you. And I do have a couple more questions from our audience, if we could. Charlene Tess wants to know if your character Cleek Purcell, is he based on somebody you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Cleek is the trickster out of medieval folklore. You know, they're always messing up things up. He's the other side of the coin with Dave Robichaux. The two of them are inadequate if the other is not around. They form one personality. But really, the character, think about it. Everybody knows one guy like that in his high school. There's always one. You know, when something happens, just, you know, something disastrous, the principal gets on the microphone through the old speaker up there. So-and-so report to the principal's office. They don't even have the evidence on the guy. There's only this one person who would do that sort of thing. And yes, I knew that fellow. Okay. How about this one? This is I use this, right? This fellow in New Orleans, he was always in trouble. He was cutting through Tulane by the medical school, and there was an incinerator there where parts of people were burned. Somebody had forgotten this, or left behind this cooler full of arms. And this fellow, I won't use his name. He said, "This is a gold mine." This is a gold mine. He got on the St. Claude streetcar in the back and hung his hands on the straps. People screaming. They jumped out of windows. He went to the drive-in theater with them and doing the show started. He hung his hands from the doors. This was back, we called them the passion pits. You know, no passion that night. People were screaming all over the theater. That's Cleek Purcell. This is the guy you get on your side.
We also have another Robichaux question. Do you have any plans for another Robichaux novel?
Well, I just don't plan. I never have planned one of them. I wrote the first one because of Rick DeMarinis, who's my writer. You know his work, I'm sure. Rick told me when I couldn't get back into print, I had those 13 years when I was out of hardback print at least. But and I wrote, I don't know how many stories and books besides the Lost Kickback Boogie, but Rick said it all. He said, "Jim, just put a police officer in your stories, and that's all you need to do." And I said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "No, you can probably get an advance with two chapters." And I really didn't believe. The next, we had been fishing right here in the Bitterroot River, and he told me that 2 or 3 days later, Pearl and I and Alifair, she was a little tyke then, we were in San Fran by the City Lights bookstore, and I bought one of these tablets like this, and I walked down to an Italian cafe. It was an outdoor place, and right across the street was a Catholic church. And I started writing in longhand, and I wrote 2 chapters, and I sent the chapters to my friend Charlie Williford. I was good friends with Charles Williford. He was a crime writer, and I loved Charles. He was a really good guy, and I kind of fellow that you listen to because he really knows things. He was at Arnheim and the liberation of Dachau a true war hero and a really decent guy. And he wrote me back and he said, he was talking about the character, Dave Robichaux. He said, Jim, I think you may have created the best character narrator in American crime writing. And so I said, gee, really, God. And Philip Spitzer, who was my agent and whom I met while he was driving a cab in Hell's Kitchen. He drove a cab at night and worked. He had a one-man agency in Hell's Kitchen. And we got an advance on the Neon Rain. I almost died. I said, but that's it. But none of my writing has actually changed. It never changed. The issues are all the same. It's social justice and redemption. And it's the search for the Grail. That's it. Everything I've ever wrote is about the search for the Grail. It's a story of Lancelot, and King Arthur, and all those guys. But those guys, that story is a story about an earlier story that goes back to, Celtic times, and thunder and lightning and cavalry galloping across the sky. Look, that's it. Everything the human race is about ultimately is contained in the story of Charlemagne and King Arthur. It is all there. This is what's strange, and it's because of the times in which we live. I've been using the Elizabethan theater, Greek and Roman mythology, and the Bible for over 60 years, and nobody has noticed because they don't read those things anymore.
Well, that's
terrible. I'm afraid if I get upstairs,
well,
somebody's going to say, "We've been waiting for you."
That's an interesting segue to this next question from Doug Green, and this reference to your novel, Another Kind of Eden. He wants to know, what was the supernatural ending an allusion to?
The ending of what?
Another Kind of Eden. What was that supernatural ending alluding to?
Oh,
well, it's pretty complex. If someone hasn't read the book, it would not understand the question. But it's a very good question. Namely, that events happen toward the end of the book that seem to call up memories of the Salem witch trials. And you see the Salem witch trials of 1693 and on into the early 18th century are something that, again, we don't look at. We don't quite understand what that means. But, we admire many of the virtues, and that's good. Namely, the work ethic, the religiosity, the fact that they could actually kill their neighbors. They hanged, 14 or 19 people. They did so much misery to children. And we think, how in God's name did they do this? These were fine people. Proctor, you remember, was the man who actually on the scaffold spoke the Our Father. And according to Puritan law, if a person could say the Our Father, this was a demonstration of his innocence. They threw the book all over the gunwales and hanged him anyway. They pressed their neighbor, what was his name? The old fellow, the blacksmith. They pressed him with stones, one stone at a time on his chest. His last words, they said, "Will you confess?" And he said, "More weight." That's it. That's the last thing he said. He had such courage, and they killed him anyway. It was innocent. How did they do that? But that's it. That's what this story is about. because in this story, we have our own example. The murder by Rockefeller and his goons of the people there, the striking miners and the IWW. How do we do those kinds of things to our own people? You could put it in another frame of reference. The murder of all these children, or people in stores shot to death all over the place. So someone can sell AR-15 rifles. How do we do that to our own people? I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. This country has changed. I don't care what anybody says. It's not the same country. Years ago, people would have been scandalized. They would have said, what in God's name are you all doing?
Well, thank you. So I'm going to turn it back to David again.
So I'll continue with a couple of thoughts here. This is not so much a question, but I know we have a lot of emerging writers listening in here, and if you didn't catch this, the Lost Get Back Boogie was rejected over 100 times, I read, before finally being published by LSU Press. And I think the lesson here is to hang with it, persistence, tenacity, and also I think there's a story here about university presses as well. They play an important role in the literary ecosystem. I mean, I did publish Winter Counts with HarperCollins, but I'm also the series editor for a new imprint called Native Edge at the University of New Mexico Press, where we're trying to find emerging Native writers. But I know the story about how you were rejected and your agent was a cab driver, but do you have anything to say to those emerging writers? How did you hang in there for 100 rejections? It would have killed me. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is my advice always, that if you're an artist, doesn't matter whether you're a writer, fiction writer, poet, musician, actor, it's a gift. And it's a gift that comes from outside of ourselves. Every artist knows that. And once a person realizes he has the gift, he has to be loyal to it. And he has to be loyal to the hand that presented him with the gift. If he does not, he will never have peace. He will never be happy. And as he grows older, he will bear a terrible resentment against himself. Number two, never quit. Never quit. You bear down on the batter one pitch at a time. And at the bottom of the ninth inning, you'll be pleasantly surprised at the mathematics up there on the scoreboard. That's what it is. You also learn very quickly. Don't let the world take away your light. There are more people, unfortunately, who will discourage a young writer than will encourage it. It'll turn around later. But always remember, like my father again, my dad used to say, the cat calls always come from the bleachers. He played semi-pro. Isn't that a view? Always, always. Look, you spit in the world's mouth if you have to, but you never quit. I learned this when I was 20 years old. I was working offshore, oil exploration. Not long, but I did that a little while. I didn't have a residence. I rented a post office box. And so we worked 10 days on, 5 days off. 10 days on the barge, and then come back home, Lafayette, Louisiana, and go to the post office, and there would be my rejections. I would give myself 36 hours to send the material back to another magazine. That's the way you do it. If you put your manuscript in a box or in your desk, you guarantee failure. You never give up. Lastly, when people might discourage you or they not understand you, remember that voice, that thing, that power outside of you will never let you down. I believe in the spiritual world. George Orwell, in an essay called Why I Write, talked about this. And he said, every writer has a hidden vanity. He believes the world he sees is an exquisite moment of truth, like clicking a camera. And that's exquisite moment, something he has to tell other people about, or he will not get any rest. And so that's the gift. It's kind of a neurosis. Freud had absolute contempt for novelists. I don't know if you've ever read his essay on the novelist, but I think he said one thing that's correct. The imagination, the well of experience down here in the 90% where the subconscious is, you access it through a neurosis. That means you have to pay some dues, and you've gotten your ticket punched a few times. That's just the way it is. But again, something that Shakespeare said, and I forget which play it was. He said, all power lies in the world of dreams. And what he's saying is the story is inside you. Now, I facetiously a few moments ago mentioned about accessing mythology and the Bible and so forth. What does that really mean? It's Carl Jung, actually. Carl Jung believed we inherit what are cultural patterns. The unconscious is filled with material. And there's something about 27 or 28 possible plots. But there are only so many things that human beings can do. But that's it. The story is inside of us. It's inside every human being. But in other words, neurotic people are not necessarily impaired. They are gifted. And look, who would you rather hang around with? A bunch of ad salesmen, three-piece suit guys, bunch of capitalists, whatever, or somebody like Cleet Purcell. Tell me who you'd rather spend some time with. That's it. That's it.
Well,
you wake up every day wanting to go right to your desk. And look, I used to teach creative writing, and sometimes a young person would say, "Hey, Jim, you think I got it? You think I got the talent?" Bad question. Because if you're a real artist, you never doubt it, and you can't care. You won't care less about rejection. It's just to heck with them. I mean, gee whiz. It's great being a writer. It's a great life. It's a great life.
Well, I can't let you go because I know we're going to reserve the last half hour for audience questions. So there are a couple of things that I just want to indulge myself here. A couple of things. The last line of your acknowledgments, you say, "We don't care what people say, rock and roll is here to stay." And I loved it because I'm a big music guy and I put a lot of music into Winter Counts. And I'm a rock fan, rock and jazz. My son's like hip hop and electronic music, but I like rock and roll. And so I just wondered if you want to talk about this. Did any bands provide inspiration? Because you brought in some bands in here, some bands that I didn't really know of, some rock bands. I was a little bit surprised because I consider myself informed. So I would love to hear your take on what music inspired, what music you've listened to. So I'll let you take it.
American music's greatest gift of our nation to the whole world. To the whole world. You know who said that? It was the Beatles. Every one of them said. I think each one. I remember. They talk about Chuck Berry, of course, and blue suede shoes. Carl. Carl was Carl's name. Golly Moses. But that's it. I always say that those American philosophers, Danny and the Juniors, we don't care what people say. Rock and roll is here to stay. And that's it. And rock and roll is what? Well, it comes from R&B, which comes from people of color. And we have every kind of music in this country. Look at American jazz, swing, country music. My heavens. They didn't come from other countries. Well, they did, I mean, with immigration. But my point is that today, we are the people that everyone looks to for leadership in the arts. You know, people denigrate Hollywood all the time. Guess who denigrates them most? Right-wing people are always dumping on Hollywood. Where do they go on their vacations? They don't go to some place I won't name, but they go to Hollywood, of course. And look, think of it this way. I worked a little bit in film, and I did. I was in the Screenwriters Guild, and I did spend some time with some really interesting people. Here's what's most interesting. Behind the camera are about 100 people, none of whom are normal.
Oh, boy.
And they come up with something like The Godfather or Gone with the Wind. I mean, people who glow in the dark with neurosis who are absolutely nuts, who are thrown at. They have scorch marks from electroshock therapy. The guy's got an Academy Award. But that's it. It's great. Just don't take it seriously.
How much, let me jump off on that. How much did you get involved? I know there have been a couple of adaptations of your books. Were you involved much at all, or did you just kind of hand it off to the Hollywood people?
I was, okay, yeah. I wrote the first screenplay on Heaven's Prisoners, and it was rejected. So I provided for them everything that wouldn't work.
Oh, boy.
And another screenwriter wrote a screenplay that worked. But and I worked on I worked on the screenplay of In the Electric Mist with Confederate Dead. But I always enjoyed it. I think that it's good to keep in mind that enjoy it. It's that's one of those things, don't walk away. Look, this has been my experience in Hollywood. There are people who are loud and profane, and you get away from them as fast as you can. It's a confession of inadequacy, and in effect, they're fraudulent people. The talented people are amazingly talented. They're just extraordinary, and probably it's who cares what the personalities are like? It's like anything, I believe. It's like anything. The only, I think I go back again and again to something that applies to all artists, that when a person claims credit for his talent, again, an actor, writer, poet, sculptor, he is going to lose that talent. I have never seen it. I've never seen the exception. You watch this fellow and you see him on television, it's a narcissistic kind of, display. That fellow is not at the top of his career. He's sliding down the other side of the mountain. The other thing to remember, I think, is that humility is not a vice with a writer or any artist. It is a necessity. And again, I've never heard a real writer, say anything other than that. And also, you notice that real artists are pretty good people. Why? Because they have empathy. You have to. If you don't have a connection with your fellow man or women, people, you can't write well. You know who said that was Washington Irving. he said that a writer must have a reader or he's not a writer. He said, your work is not real until you have a recipient. And he said, number two, that you form a kind of reciprocity of trust. I think that's how he called it. And that's it. And think of it. In other words, a successful writer is one who is trusted by his reader. Number two, who is admired and liked by his reader. Think of the most famous first line of a novel in American literature, Herman Melville's
Call Me Ishmael.
First page, call me Ishmael, meaning I'm your pal. And you can trust me.
So I promised some writing questions because I know that we have a fair number of writers here. This is sponsored by Rocky Mountain Mystery Writers of America. And I profess to a little self-servingness here as well because I'm writing the second book in my series. How do you keep a series fresh? I'm thinking of the Robo-Show series. What do you do? Because I confess I'm struggling here because I don't want to repeat myself in Wisdom Corner, my new book, and I want to get, I want to hit some of the same things that made the first book hopefully a little bit good. I want to keep it fresh. Do you think much about this, or how one of the masters of this genre? How do you keep a book in a series fresh?
Okay. When you use a first-person narrator, keep this one thing in mind. He is a witness to history. He is not the story. That's it. He is a witness to history. Why is Dave Robichaux a very successful narrator? It's because he represents everyman. The Everyman series of plays, morality plays in the medieval era is Dave's antecedent. That's it. And he represents what is best in human beings. He's a blue-collar knight errant. He looks out for those who have no voice. He gives voice to those who have none. He tries to defend people who have been treated unjustly. He's a kind and decent man. He has many of his faults, but he is ultimately a kind and decent man. Cleet and Dave Robichaux also never act to protect themselves. If they create or commit a violent act, it is to defend someone else. They never use a woman's name in any way in a derogatory fashion. They never use God's name in vain. Those are the two rules. They are what's best in people, but ultimately they bring social justice to areas where there were none, where nobody sees it. We were talking about Angola prison and other things about the subculture. There's where, well, it's the story of, in the Bible of the Good Samaritan. They are the Good Samaritans. That's it. They got your back. They're great guys. Yeah, they're good guys. But they're very much like what most people admire, ultimately. These are the things that are built into us, particularly as Americans. The American ethos is one of the best in the world.
Agreed. Well, I know we're coming up to a break, but I can't let us go to the final bit of this really wonderful and amazing interview, for which I can't thank you enough. But I'm gonna sneak in one more before we turn into our readers' questions. So I read a fairly our chat questions. I read a fairly recent interview with you in Crime Reads. I love that site, and you discussed using political themes in fiction, which I do as well in Winter Counts. And so I'm interested. And here's what you said. I don't want to compare myself to William Shakespeare, but Shakespeare or Elizabethan drama is all political. I aspire to write in that vein. So much of great art is political, but there is a crucial distinction. Art should not proselytize or become didactic. Once that occurs, the artist transform into a propagandist. So I liked this a lot, and I just wanted you to talk about that because I walk that line as well. I didn't want winter counts to become a dry textbook of crimes against natives, but at the same time I wanted to inform. So I think it's a fine line, and I really like the way you put it. Do you want to speak to that point a little bit?
Yes, and you make a good distinction there, though. But right, as you indicated, number one, politicizing or proselytizing is a deliberate attempt to alter people's opinion. That may have its, there may be legitimate reasons for that person's cause, but it's not art, it's something else. Okay. But number two, sometimes I get an angry letter and someone will say, but you're political, what is all this about Indians or people of color or women? That's not politics. We're talking about humanity. There's an absolute enormous gap between the two. Politics are what? Golly, ultimately nothing. It's just ideology is nothing more than words that usually are manufactured by self-serving people who have minimal intellectual capacities. No, these are people who great guys. Look, why is it that most of us are not pursuing political careers? It's a real drag. I don't know how it's like your garbage man. Let the garbage man take out the garbage. Who wants to make a career out of it? Anyway, but the thing is to record for history what you have perceived, have seen, or know about, or to try to somehow convey what is best in us. The people who, like Dave or your character, people who are trying to do things for their fellow man, and we give voice to them. We do it as writers, but again, it's like saying, golly, I think the best war book I ever read was For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is the story of communists, an American dynamiter, and all, but they're communists and they do terrible things. But when you read that book, you understand why they do these terrible things. Guess whose favorite book that was? Do you remember? John McCain. John McCain said he read For Whom the Bell Tolls over and over again. Here's a Republican, conservative man, but he knew a great book. And of course, he was a great man himself in many ways. But that's it. It's not political. It's the story of suffering, the things that Hemingway saw, the terrible things that occurred had some kind, it doesn't mean they're justified, but there's a reason, there's a raison d'etre. It may be a terrible one, but nonetheless, look, a hungry man doesn't dwell on morality. That's it.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm just eating up these comments. I'm just loving them. But ZJ, I know that we had agreed we want to let our wonderful viewers have a chance to ask their questions. So is it time for a giveaway and then some questions?
Absolutely. Thanks again, David. Okay, we're going to do our last round of giveaways. And the winner of a James Lee Burke branded t-shirt is Rebecca Gallimore. And the winner of David's Winter Counts novel is Madeline Harris Calloway. And the winner of James's book is Chris Goff. So congratulations to all of you. Yeah, very good. We do have some two more interesting questions for James. This is from an anonymous attendee who wants to know if you've ever considered writing a book with a strong female protagonist and what effect she might have on disconnecting from our penchant for neocolonialism. And what if Pamela had been president?
Well, boy, that's a really interesting question. The book I just finished writing is that book. And it is written in the first person, in the present, although, I mean, in other words, in that it's not contemporaneously present. And it's the story primarily of two slave women. And it's based on part of the cousin of Marie Laveau, except her name is Hannah Laveau, and another woman who was enslaved. And also a Confederate soldier, or two Confederate soldier, and a guy who is one of my favorite characters. He is a brigand who is absolutely insane. Half of his face is rotting away. I don't want to give it. It's a great book. This is a great book. Right now. There's six companies reading it. That's right. Anyway, I'm bragging about this book. I'll say it again. It's great. It is really good. Anyway, it's a story of a plantation, St. Martin Parish, Lady of the Lake Plantation. It was owned by my great-great-grandfather. Anyway, it's a wonderful story about what actually occurred in Louisiana, because Louisiana is second only to Virginia in number of battles that were fought there. But in many ways, that were fought for different reasons. It also deals with Shiloh. My great-great-uncle, William Burke, was at the 18th Louisiana at Shiloh. He was not a slave owner. He was an abolitionist. All three of the Burke brothers, they were Catholic abolitionists, but they fought for the Confederacy. It was a very complex world back then. I've always liked, the historian from Memphis, golly Moses, he said, do not use 20th century eyes to look at the mid-19th century, because it was much more complex than we think. But that war never ended. That's what it's about. I wrote that story based upon events in 62 and 63, 1862, 63, but it's about today. It's still there. Anyone who denies that, got his blinders on.
That's great. And then we have one more question from a participant. Back to an earlier comment you made about adding a policeman into your story. And Dana Dobbs wants to know, what is it about adding a policeman that adds value to the novel so that publishing houses value the story more?
Well, I can't answer for others, but it's a very good question. It depends on, rather than use a policeman as a term, let's say a voice. What is the voice telling the reader? The voice, say, Dave Robichaud is a police officer. Often he is not, because he gets in trouble. His badge is always being taken away from him. Anyway, but what's the point? They represent what is best in us. Dave Robichaud actually tries to bring justice to the situation. In other words, we can call him a police officer, but better said, he is the knight errant. The character I mentioned, the blue-collar knight errant, Dave Robichaud is actually based on the knight errant in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. He is the peacemaker. He's kind, he's good, but he's also brave. And he tries to do good for others. In other words, he has ultimately he says this many times himself, he's on the road to Golgotha. He's not just a man carrying a branch. He is on his way to Golgotha. And it's called a Gethsemane syndrome. That's the term for it. It's hell on earth, brother. It's called also clinical and agitated depression. And you literally sweat blood. And after you go through it, you're never the same again. He did that. Okay, when he talks about the garden or Gethsemane, he's saying, in effect, he has seen the world at its worst, but he's still a believer. And that's why he's a great cop, and that's why he's a great guy.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, David, back to you, sir.
I know we're starting to roll to the end of our program today, but if you're like me, you're probably leaving this wonderful discussion with a whole bunch of books that you either want to read for the first time or reread. And so I would love to ask you, given the breadth of your knowledge and just the wonderful experience you bring, what can you tell us? What are some of the books that have most influenced you, or maybe phrased another way, what's an underappreciated novel that you'd like to mention to our viewers? And it can be crime fiction or otherwise. I've heard you express in interviews your admiration for Michael Connelly, which I share. But I wanted to give you this chance to talk about some novels that maybe you can share with us that maybe didn't get the exposure that they should have.
Yeah, that's a great question. And particularly, it's a great question for a great discussion for a younger writer to think about. Okay, never read bad fiction. Stay away from it. Don't touch it with a dung fork. It will not help your art. You read only the very best. Okay, for me, that's Nathaniel Hawthorne. And was a great writer, but also the early naturalist. Stephen Crane. Stephen Crane was only 27 years old when he died. But you learn how to write from reading what these people have done. Okay, think, for example, of the two books that I would recommend written by William Faulkner as textbooks in writing, because Faulkner, in the entirety of American literature, outwrote anyone when it came to experimentation. The Sound and the Fury. He does everything that Joyce did and then some. The other one is Lie Down, As I Lay Dying. As I Lay Dying. I used the same kind of structure in that book, in my book that I just finished about the war between the states. Okay, golly Moses, the great women writers we have. Gee whiz, my favorite, the lady from Mississippi. Oh, golly, oh, my heavens. I have a terrible problem that when I have to remember names.
You're not saying Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah, okay, Flannery O'Connor. Well, she's from Georgia, but she's in the same category. No, the lady from golly, Mississippi. Oh, she was a beautiful human being and a beautiful writer. But anyway, they're books that you never let go of. Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. I think that was his greatest novel. Also, in learning how to write, you might just try his first book. Oh, golly,
Old Man in the Sea, was that it or no?
God, The Sun Also Rises.
Oh,
The Sun Also Rises. And you know what he used to tell writers, young writers himself? He said, try to just write a declarative sentence, subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, and never use the adjective before nouns. Last paragraph of The Sun Also Rises. The sun was hot and bright, and the houses looked sharply white. What a line. He also used monosyllabic line words rather than polysyllabic words. He used to call them the 25-cent words instead of the 75-cent words. I love one thing he once said about how he wrote. He said, I always do it with 3 cushion shots.
How about in crime fiction? Do you want to tell us anybody in crime fiction that you and the greats? I mean, you've mentioned Connolly. Anybody that you want to mention in our genre?
Well, we're talking about actually prose style. Golly, Moses, holy Moses. I don't know. There are a lot of very good ones. The fellow from England, Chandler. Chandler, I think, was actually just a very good prose writer. In terms of crime, I don't think he knew anything about. I've only read one of his books, but it's one of his best, and I forget the title. But he had a master's degree, I think, from Oxford University. He was an oil man, lost all his money in the Depression, and he used his talent to create these characters who are really interesting characters. But he didn't know anything about. I mean, private detectives live in a world that is, as a rule, it's just a sewer. I mean, everybody knows it. It's really ugly stuff. It's just like, criminality. That usually, look, okay, I hope I didn't say, I don't want to offend anybody, but most television presentation of law enforcement, those presentations have nothing to do with reality. Any police reporter knows that. Cops know that. This stuff is laughable.
Well, I want to leave some time for Lori to come in and talk a little bit about say some goodbyes and all that. So I think we probably have time. We've kept you long enough, but I'd like to I'd love to bring it on home here. I want to bring it back to the book here. I know you work on a new one. We're all really thrilled to hear about the new one, and your productivity is fantastic. But folks, don't lose the opportunity to read this. I am vouching for this book that you're going to love it. And so I want to kind of bring us home today, Jim. What do you hope your readers take away from this novel? What would you like for them to take away from Every Cloak Rolled in Blood?
I hope it brings solace to people. People who have gone through a trauma, not simply perhaps loss of a loved one, but many kinds of loss, or people who have gone through either what is called agitated or clinical depression, that it seems as though the earth is in effect abandoned the person. This is the emotion of people who go through these things. It's like the sun is a black wafer slipping across the rim of the earth, and that it will never rise again. That's the feeling the person has. If the person seeks out the wrong individual for help, things can get even worse. It's a terrible place to be. And that's why it's called the Garden of Gethsemane syndrome by psychoanalysts. I hope my book helps them, because you come out on the other side of it. You come out on the other side of it, and you'll never be afraid again. You're afraid of absolutely nothing in the world, because nothing in the world is worse than you have experienced. I give you that, my word of honor, that there's an answer for it. And I'm not selling my book. For God's sake, go to the right people, get in the right group, but the sun's going to shine again, and you'll be tough as heck. You know what you do? You grin and you walk through the cannon smoke, and it runs the bad guys up the wall. That's the way you live.
Wow. What a magnificent place to end this. And, I just want to honor you. You went through the toughest thing. Again, I'm a dad. I can't imagine. And our condolences once again. But what I love is how you're trying to help people. Even in this, you're reaching out and you're helping people with this and in this interview. And I just find that so fantastic and so magnificent. And what a pleasure it has been to speak with you and learn about your background, your themes, the books you like, even the music you listen to. It's been really just I think everybody watching here is going to concur with that it's been really our pleasure and honor. So thank you, Jim, so much.
Oh, Dave, same to you, Dave. You're a really good man. Thank you, sir. You really run a great interview, and I love your work. I'm reading your book, your last book. So anyway, thank you for having me on your show. I sure appreciate it. And CJ too, the gentleman who was with us earlier, and the lady. I didn't get her. I didn't.
Oh, here she comes. Here she is.
Hi. Okay. Is that Miss Lori?
Yes, thank you, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so fascinating. You leave me with you leave me with words of wisdom.
Well, I love I love your store. Well, it's a great show. I signed books there many times. It's always a great time. And I lived there. I lived in Denver. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. David, you did a remarkable, fantastic job. Thank you again to our co-sponsors, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers and Sisters of Crime. This will be posted on our Rocky Mountain Mystery Writers of America YouTube channel, as well as the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers podcast. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Been great.
Thank you.
Can't wait to see you guys in person sometime and buy you a drink.
All righty.